Matt, when did you become interested in aviation?
So it sort of started when I was at school, actually. I was in the Combined Cadet Force in the RAF, and so we got a few flights in Bulldogs, and that kind of planted the seed that this might be something that I'd like to do. But at that time, I was really into computers. This was sort of mid 90s, and I was really into IT, and I sort of pursued that career. And it wasn't until quite a few years later, my office in Bristol, just around the corner, was Filton Airfield. And so I thought I'd pop along and do a PPL, or at least see what it's all about. And I was hooked like straight away, basically from that first couple of lessons. I thought, you know what, I actually want to make a career of this one, and yeah, with aspirations of joining an airline. And but yeah, things kind of took quite a different turn.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're going to get into that. But I have to ask, like, why didn't you want to go down the military route rather than? Obviously, you picked the kind of civil route, but like, I always thought like pilots want to go the military side. But what was your like thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the main thing was actually because I went to boarding school and I was sort of had this whole life of quite regimented and quite kind of
Mm,
routine kind of existence. The military just sort of felt like it was going to be the same of that, and I was,
got you.
by the time I hit 18, I was like, yeah, I'm not really fussed on doing that. So, and also my eyesight, actually, funny enough, I'm short-sighted, and I think at least in those days, I thought that you weren't allowed to fly airplanes unless you got perfect 20/20 vision.
Yeah.
You can fly a passenger load of people, and that's fine, but fighter jet, no, you need good vision for that.
So yeah, can you talk us through your PPL and also CPL because that's quite a fascinating process.
It's quite a long drawn out process for those who don't know. So I did it distance learning, which meant I kind of could keep my IT job whilst I was doing all the training. And so the PPL was sort of 40 odd hours or so in a PA-28 out of Filton with a company called Aeros, who've got a main base at Gloucester. And yeah, Filton, unfortunately, yeah, it's gone now. It's I think just a bunch of houses. But I moved on from there and then did the ground school, which was distance learning. And to do that with what they call the ATPLs, which is the airline transport pilot license exams. There's 14 of these things, which cover everything from meteorology to air law to performance of aircraft and this sort of thing. And so it's a lot of studying. It took me a whole year actually to do it. Kind of going into the office in the morning and doing all the kind of work at work, and then in my lunch break I'd do a little bit of studying, and then when I come home in the evening I'd have dinner and then do even more studying. And yeah, this went on for like a whole year basically. But I did all right with that one actually. And once I sort of finished that, then I had to do some hour building because you need 100 hours PIC in an aircraft before you can then go and do your commercial license,
Okay.
which I chose to do at Bristol Flying Centre in Bristol International Airport. And in those days, it was Piper Senecas, which kind of old piston twins with
Yeah.
all the old six-pack instruments and a proper kind of hands-on aircraft. And obviously, they've got simulators for those as well, which are also a bit cheaper than flying the aircraft. But it was a pretty expensive thing to do, to be honest. I was quite fortunate in that in my IT job, I was reasonably well paid for that. And I sort of moved back with mum and dad and rented my flat out to kind of get a little bit more money and sort of pursued it all the way through and qualified end of 2008, beginning of 2009, which for those old enough to remember, that was a pretty bad recession. So not a great time to be qualified with 200 hours of experience and airlines laying pilots off left, right, and centre.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, before we get on to Indonesia, like what was job hunting like? Was it, I mean, is there such a thing as like Indeed for pilots? Or like how does it work? It must be quite
So these
complicated.
days, I guess, yeah, these days, I suppose probably people use LinkedIn and there are kind of a lot of
Mm,
adverts posted on there. But back in those days, there wasn't so much of that. So it was kind of a matter of just sort of trying to get hold of a lot of from networking kind of in person more and just trying to get hold of contacts of, business jet operators, more kind of specialist work operators, and obviously all the airlines. You Google them, British Airways and EasyJet and everything. You could find those guys out, and so you had to keep a spreadsheet though to make sure you didn't apply to someone too many, more than once, because sometimes you kind of forgot the names of some of the operators, and kind of when you replied, and then when you want to chase it up, and I was literally applying to everyone in Europe, anyone I could find who had an aeroplane. I thought, well, just apply, never know what happened, but yeah, there was just nothing. So the job in Indonesia, I found out with a friend of a friend kind of told me about this one. And that's kind of a lot of way it works as well with pilots. So someone will find a job, will find out about one, they'll apply themselves and probably hopefully get that job. And then if they get it, they might then tell their mates about it. And that's sort of the way it works, really. And that's how I found out about this company called Susi Air.
Yeah, Susi Air, absolutely amazing company. So yeah, tell us about your process of going over to Indonesia. And I think your first aircraft was a Cessna Caravan, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I went out to initially the process was just kind of an email. So I sent them an email with my CV and whatnot, and they came back to me a few weeks later and offered me an interview in Munich, of all places, because one of their sort of senior pilots was living there at the time. So that was obviously convenient for someone in Europe, and a flight to Europe is a lot cheaper than a flight to Indonesia. And kind of got through all that process, and then eventually got offered the job and had to go via Singapore to pick up a visa from there before I could then go into Indonesia. And yeah, it was sort of started out on the Cessna Caravan as a co-pilot because I only had 200 hours, and the plan was spend a couple of years out there, get some experience, hopefully get my command on the Caravan, and then come back to the UK and work for one of the airlines. That was the goal basically. But yeah, things kind of changed when I got out there.
So yeah, what was the flying like on the Caravan? What kind of, was it like every day? What sort of missions, but like what sort of flying would you be doing?
So the Caravan's it's a pretty decent aeroplane, and Susie used to fly the multi-crew, so you'd have a captain and a co-pilot, and this was an Indonesian regulation because anything more with more than 9 seats and anything more with 9 passengers on board, you had to have 2 pilots. So the Caravans are
Okay.
configured with 12 seats, and Susie would mostly have what was called these Parentis contracts. Apprentice roughly translates into English as like pioneering route. And so they had bases dotted all over Indonesia, from sort of Sumatra and Java, Kalimantan, which is Borneo, we know it as Borneo in this part of the world, and all the way through to kind of central Sulawesi and then into Papua. And what they'd do is they'd have 1 or 2 caravans in the kind of slightly bigger towns, where maybe an actual 737 could land and that sort of thing. And then from there, you'd connect into these much more remote, small kind of airstrips dotted amongst the kind of smaller towns, and basically kind of build a network, kind of, hub and spoke kind of network that would connect these small towns to these big ones. And then if people want to go further, they can then obviously go on the bigger planes. And that's what these kind of Parentis routes did really. So we're mostly flying passengers and all over the place. It was nice as a co-pilot. You'd moved around a lot. So you'd put you somewhere for a few weeks, and then move you along somewhere else. So you kind of got to see it all to decide, as you kind of spend time out there, maybe where you want to settle down as a captain.
Absolutely. And was the Caravan quite a reliable aircraft?
Yeah, I mean the engine in it, it's a Pratt and Whitney PT6 turboprop, and those engines they're ancient and they've been going since actually they were well the 60s I guess, and they were originally oil pumps. They were designed to sort of sit out on oil rigs and just pump oil continuously, so they could run
Oh,
for tens of thousands of hours just non-stop. So they adapted that kind of design into an aircraft engine, and that reliability is just continued through. So the overhaul is sort of 3,500 hours between the overhauls on them, and I never personally had any problems with them. And I've got thousands of hours on these engines now. You had absolute faith in them, basically, and the maintenance was actually very good out in Indonesia. A lot of the aircraft were very new, so yeah, absolutely reliable.
what was it actually like to fly? Was it a joy to fly?
Yeah, the Caravan, like it's got this sort of reputation that it's just like a big 172, which is your traditional kind of little high wing Cessna 4 seat. And that's pretty true, to be honest. It's a big plane, sort of, what is it, over 4 tons worth, and
Wow.
it doesn't feel it. Even with 12 passengers aboard, the performance was actually pretty good, to be honest. And yeah, had a nice autopilot. As I say, Susie's aircraft are quite new. A lot of them have the glass cockpit, so you've got sort of 3 screens in there. And with sort of 2 of you on board, it was really quite easy to fly, actually.
So how many years did you spend on the Caravan over there?
So it was only 2 years in the end, and at that point you'd think I would have wanted to go back to the UK and work for the airlines. But whilst I was there, as I mentioned, as a co-pilot, you moved around quite a lot, so you got to see different bits of Indonesia. And when I got out to Papua, which is the kind of easternmost province and super mountainous, it's on the New Guinea island, which a lot of people confuse it with Papua New Guinea, but it is the same island. But Papua New Guinea is the sort of eastern side, which is independent, and the western half, which is Papua, which is where Susi Air had some bases. When I got out there as a co-pilot, we started to do, the mountain flying and the bush flying and this sort of thing. So it's a lot more extreme than the other parts of Indonesia, and I was hooked on it. I just thought this is just bloody cool. I want to try and do this for a few more years. I don't really want to go back and work for an EasyJet or BA or whoever. This is just so much cooler, and they're paying me to do this. This is ace. But that's also where I bumped into the Pilatus Porter, and that's an aircraft that completely changed everything.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So why the change of aircraft?
So the Pilatus Porter, it's a big machine. It's a big tail dragger. It's just under 3 tons. Same engine as the Caravan, PT6 turboprop, slightly smaller actually, but a much more efficient wing on the Porter. It's a super STOL aircraft. STOL being short takeoff and landing. You've probably seen these kind of super cubs with the big balloon tires and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the Porter's, sits in that realm, but obviously a much bigger version, able to sort of carry up to a ton of cargo on board. And and just the places you could go with this thing, I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen Air America, the sort of landing on the side of dirt strips and this sort of thing. And it was honestly just love at first sight when I saw one of these. I literally arrived in Papua as a co-pilot. We landed in Santani. I'd actually ferried a Caravan over there with another pilot. And I saw the Porter there sitting on the apron, and I was like, "That's a cool machine." I knew Susi Air had them, but I'd
Yeah.
never seen one in person. And for whatever, like, I don't know, just something clicked in my mind, and I thought, you know what? I want to fly that machine. I want to do what those guys do with that plane. And then, yeah, I basically spent the next year and a half trying my best to get onto that fleet.
And from the pictures you've sent me, it looks like an absolute beast as well. What was it like to fly?
I mean, absolutely. It's it is a big machine. It's actually a lot more maneuverable than the Caravans were. So it's actually a neutrally stable aircraft. So most airplanes, when you trim them out, it's in a straight and level attitude. And you let go, it will just sort of sit there in that attitude. The Porter won't do that. You can trim it out so that it's no control loading. But if you let go and sort of look down and fill in a tech log or look out the window aimlessly or something, it will just start banking over in one direction or the other. It's not quite unstable, but it's not stable, so neutrally stable. But that makes it very maneuverable. You can hoik it around surprisingly well considering the size of the aircraft. And it's just, yeah, it's one of these aircraft. Once you get used to the way it flies, and you just sort of strap it on and take it wherever it needs to go, and it's always got your back. I always used to say it was a much better aircraft than I ever was a pilot, which is probably the right way around for an aeroplane and a pilot, especially in that environment.
Yeah. So what was the cockpit like? Was it all glass?
So again, with it was a very modern aircraft. Susie bought an almost brand new aircraft. So I think they can't remember how they had 7 or 9 actually in the end, and at least 5 to 6 of them were with the glass cockpit. So again, Garmin G950, big screens with nice weather radar. Even like terrain awareness system on there and traffic system to tell you about other aircraft around. No autopilot though. The Porter didn't have autopilots, unlike the Caravans, so you had to hand fly it all the time. Some of the older ones did have the clockwork instruments, but they still had like twin Garmin 430s, which are these kind of smaller GPS units. And in terms of performance, they flew exactly the same. They had the same engine, the same controls, and everything else. It was literally just the kind of avionics were a little bit different, but yeah, just such a machine to fly. A real proper pilot's aeroplane, that one.
So can you talk us through a typical day as a PC6 pilot and in Indonesia? And what was that like? Was every day different, or did you know beforehand what you were doing, or was it on the day like this is what you're doing?
So, I mean, it was very varied, and especially with the Porter, because a lot of the work we were doing was kind of charter works. There were some parentis flying, so there was a sort of a vague schedule on some days. So you sort of knew, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you'd know, okay, I'm going to go to those airstrips on that day, and etc. Those ones on the next day, and you sort of know that. But interspersed with that, you'd have all these cargo flights, and these could just be to anywhere. And as Porter pilots, you were basically trained up to be able to go and self-check yourself into any airstrip. You have a technique where you'd go and have a look at the airfields if you've never been there before. Maybe you could find some information about it from someone else, and then give yourself a bit of a heads up. But generally, it was just ad hoc charter, so you never quite knew exactly where you were going to go. Which that's what appealed to me. It was that variety really. That's what just keeps it interesting.
Absolutely. And can you maybe share some memorable stories from flying out in Indonesia?
Well, yeah, there's
We
there's
have
there's
plenty.
just so many. It's I mean, I've written a book about the whole thing, so it's there's so many, but I guess like just some of those kind of early morning sunrise flights, because of the weather out there, which was very subtropical weather. So we're on the equator, so if it was raining in the morning, you kind of knew that it would actually probably end up being quite a nice day, kind of mid morning. If it was all super sunny in the morning, what often happened is you'd end up with a beautiful sunrise, but then sort of followed closely by a lot of clouds coming in. And then kind of closing in a lot of the valleys. But those early morning sunrises on a beautiful day, you're taking off literally as the sun's getting crossing the horizon just as you get in daybreak. And that was just magical. You had these orange skies and you were just taking off there. I'd often have, Creedence Clearwater playing through the headphones as I was just getting airborne off one of these strips and things. And yeah, it was just sort of kind of like Air America, I suppose, but with less guns.
Yeah, you must have to pinch yourself every time when you saw that and you're like, I'm getting paid to do this. This is amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, there were certain routes you'd fly, and because of the situation of where the airstrips were, you'd be basically skimming the tops of the trees, and real kind of adventurous kind of stuff. Really, just kind of hugging that terrain and just finding your way up onto the plateaus, and then dropping down into the next valley to get into the airstrips and things. And it was proper freedom flying. To be honest, it's stuff you just can't do in any other bit of the world, really.
Before we move on, how did you find living over there? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, so I quite enjoyed the kind of remoteness of it all. I quite enjoyed the and the kind of variety of the different places because again, you weren't generally in one place for too long. You kind of move around a little bit, and it wasn't so uncivilized. We had houses. It wasn't like we're living in shacks and things. But you had to accept that sometimes the water wouldn't work properly, and sometimes the electricity wouldn't work for a day or two, and if you were lucky if the internet worked at all. It got better over the years, but it kind of got me used to lots of things. Like I don't watch TV these days. When I was before I went out there, I was into computers and used to play a lot of video games and watch a lot of TV. But out there just wasn't any. So you'd actually spend a lot of time outside. I'd spend a lot of time hiking and mountain biking, and just kind of hanging out with some of the other pilots in the downtime, and just sort of felt really quite privileged to sort of see and do stuff that you just know that no one else has really ever done, certainly not from the Western world, and kind of experiencing this whole pioneering kind of existence, which it always felt quite special, to be honest.
So, how long did you actually spend over there?
So all in, it was 7 years in the end.
Nice.
Part of as I said, my plan was 2 years, but I just fell in love with it all, and especially with Papua, it was. As I say, this kind of final frontier, and it's kind of interesting watching it develop, even over that short time that I was out there, seeing the changes that were going on. Some of these airstrips, the porters would always be the first aircraft in, on sort of 200-300 meters of dirt, basically. And then if that village started to expand a bit, then eventually they'd make the runway a bit bigger, and then the caravans could start to come in. And some even got to the point where you'd actually land some pretty sizable aircraft in there, sort of 80 ATRs and this sort of thing, which sort of 40, 70 seater aircraft. And that's in a small space of time. I remember even one runway, it kind of started out as about 800-meter caravan strip, and it's by the time I left, 737s were landing there. So
Wow.
it was the progression was rapid, but yeah, it was just such an interesting place to go, such an interesting place to be part of.
Yeah, sounds incredible. But you also fly the Catalina. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so that came about, funny enough, when I was actually learning to fly, when I was still in IT. I remember one of my colleagues, because obviously he knew I was into planes, and I think he was looking in eBay, it was, and he said, "Oh, have you seen this? Like, there's this flying boat. You can buy a share of this," and uh, and that kind of just stuck in the back of my mind, and it kind of said, "Oh, you only need a PPL to fly that." It was quite expensive, and I wasn't really earning enough to buy such a thing in those days. But it sort of planted a seed in the back of my head, which once I got onto the Porter and was out in Papua, you got paid pretty well for that because it's quite a dangerous job, and obviously the training involved takes a long time. So you're an sort of expensive commodity for the company, so they paid you quite well for that. And I had quite a lot of time off, so I kind of went and Googled it and thought, I wonder if they still got shares in that thing, and I kind of phoned them up, and they did. So I bought a share from a hotel room in Jakarta over a Skype
How'd you
chat.
do?
And I thought this is going to be cool. I've never even seen the plane in real life, and so I came back to UK on one of my holidays, and yeah, learned to fly a Catalina flying boat as you do, and yeah, sort of did that for 6 years. I moved quickly from the right seat to the left seat at the end of the first season, and then yeah, was doing the air shows and obviously landing on the water, which is just the big appeal. It's that is the main reason to have a Catalina is to land it on the water.
Yeah.
It's just there's nothing else like it. It's another whole dimension to aviation, being in a cockpit and being on the water. It just feels so bizarre. And yeah, it was a very cool 6 years doing that.
Is that the one based
For
at Duxford?
It is based at Duxford, yeah. And that's where she's based with Plain Sailing, which is the organisation that basically operates it. And as I said, I did sort of 6 years, and my last flight I thought was going to be bringing it back from Loch Ness. So during the COVID lockdowns, it suffered a bit of a problem with one of the engines, and they couldn't get it started, and it culminated in there was an internal shaft that connects the starter motor onto the engine that basically just sheared off, and they couldn't get it going. So, and you can't just change that. That's a majorly internal part of the engine. You need to strip it out and do that a full strip down, which you can't do when it's sitting on Loch Ness. So it needed a pretty serious amount of rescuing. You needed to get the whole aircraft out of Loch Ness with a big crane, take the engine
Wow.
off, replace the engine, and then put it back onto Loch Ness. And there was a whole fundraiser which actually did really well. I think we were all quite blown away with the generosity of everybody on that one. Raised over £30,000 to get
Oh,
her back, because this was sort of December, and winter was setting in, and we are kind of worried that if she spends the winter on the loch, it's not going to do her any good at all. And that was what I thought was going to be my last flight, was taking it back from Loch Ness back to Duxford. And I sort of sold my share at that point, because I'd done my time with it, and I thought that was a fun time. But yeah, last year they invited me back to be an instructor. And so I said, yeah, absolutely, I would love to do that.
yeah.
So I've gone ahead and got my TRI on that. So I teach people to fly it. And this year I've just qualified as a TRE, an examiner. So had a big course with the CAA, and yeah, I'm now as one of four of us now, I think, in the world on that
Wow.
one. So it's pretty
That's
cool.
incredible. That must be a lot of fun.
It's a very new role for me, so I've never been an examiner or an instructor or anything. So I felt really honoured for them to ask me to do that. It's a lot of work, to be honest. It was a lot more work than I thought. There's a lot of regulations and this sort of thing, which I've had to kind of learn a lot of things. And yeah, next season I'm really looking forward to getting into that role, and yeah, seeing how the guys do, and signing the licenses off, and yeah, it's going to be really cool.
So, Matt, let's get on to your book. What's it all about? How did you come up with the idea? And yeah, where can we find it online?
So yeah, the book. Whilst I was out in Indonesia, I used to obviously keep things on social media and things, and there was obviously quite a bit of interest in that stuff because it was, some of the images I was showing in those days, they were quite kind of out there. No one was really sharing this kind of stuff, and it generated quite a lot of interest. And I obviously was quite aware that what we were doing was pretty unique. And I'd only ever read kind of one book about that sort of flying, and it was written by a chap, a New Zealand guy, who wrote a book on flying from the other side in PNG. And I thought it was a fantastic book, and I thought, no one's ever written one about any of this sort of stuff. So I used to keep a diary. I used to just keep little notes to myself of kind of little anecdotes of funny things that happened, or interesting things, or times I've nearly died, and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I will write a book about this one day. I used to keep a blog, and initially I thought I might just sort of serialize that. But I thought, no, I'm going to actually do this properly. But it was finding the time. Writing a book does take quite a bit of time. And I guess like a lot of people, the COVID lockdown, gave me that opportunity because I wasn't working at that time. So yeah, I sat down in the garden with an electric typewriter I bought off eBay for about 20 quid, and smacked out about 100,000 words in what, 2.5 months.
Wow.
Just literally all of it. Um, and then I just sort of sat on it for ages, for quite a few years. And I kind of thought, this is just stupid. This is a good story. I need to get this out there. So I hired an editor, and he kind of took what I'd written, and he actually said it wasn't much to change on it. He said, honestly, like he said, I'm very surprised this is your first book. He said, normally I've got some overriding comments to make on books, but he said, honestly, the way you've written this is about as good as you could do, really. He said all of my kind of edits are just little sentence level things, just for correct spelling and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So I thought, oh, okay, well, he seemed to think it's quite good. So I've sent it out
Yeah.
to some, what they call beta readers, and these are just people who can read the book and just sort of see, get some feedback on it. And they all came back and just said, bloody hell, dude, this is really good. Like a proper page turner. A lot of them are finishing it in just 2 or 3 days, saying, this thing, I just couldn't put it down. It was just fantastic. So it's like, oh, okay, maybe I do have something here.
Yeah.
Um, and I applied to lots of agents to see if I could get some of them interested in it, one of them bigger publishing houses. But as per usual, I heard nothing. Like so many authors, and so I thought, right, well, I guess I'll go down the self-publishing route. So that's what I've done. I found a company in Leicester who were able to kind of make the book that I wanted to do. So it's a hardback with photographs in there. There's a lot of hand drawn maps, and there's what I think is really quite unique and cool is little QR codes on each chapter, which you can scan, and that'll take you through to my website with more
Nice.
pictures and videos and that kind of thing. So it kind of just gives you a bit more of an immersion into
Yeah.
what's going on. And yeah, I mean, if you want a copy, it's available on Amazon and all those kind of places, and actually my own website as well, which is mattdearden.co.uk. And yeah, makes a good Christmas present when that comes around. But actually, I hear it's a really good summer read. That's what people are saying. It's a holiday read. They take it. People keep sending me pictures from poolsides in various parts of the world, and
Oh,
they think,
brilliant.
"Oh, dude, I read this book in like a week. It's just so good, dude. So good." So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really pleased with that.
And can people get any signed copies anywhere? Are they available out
Um,
there?
so I have got some on my website. I'm not sure how many are left on there at the minute. I'll have to have a little look. But yeah, I'm always happy to kind of sign them. I do some talks as well, so if you keep an eye out for those. I actually did one the other day, and obviously happy to sort of sign at those kind of things. But yeah, always happy to give some signed copies out.
And I have to ask, is there any more in the works?
Um, Not at the moment. I kind of feel like I would like to write another book, but I haven't quite decided what I want to write it on yet.
Right.
I might expand that one a bit because I did sort of I put it all in there, but I've kind of kept it kind of quite simple actually. I've had a few kind of pilots go, "Oh, it'd be really good if you could write a really technical book, on exactly how to fly a
Hmm.
ball, how do you start the engine and how exactly does the brake system work, and like kind of get a bit nerdy with it." So I might do something like that, maybe a sort of small book on that. But yeah, we'll see. Watch the space as it were. Obviously, the Catalina is another whole thing that I'm sure could
Oh,
warrant a
yeah.
book or two.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a couple of questions, personal questions, just to wrap up this interview, Matt. So, do you have any hobbies?
So yeah, as you can probably see behind me, rock climbing is probably my main one when I'm not flying airplanes. I've got a little camper van which I live up near the Peak District, so I spend quite a lot of time up there, and also down on Portland, and I love it. Like rock climbing to me is it's quite similar to flying actually, and it's quite a mindful thing to do. So when you're kind of
Right.
doing when you're flying an aircraft, generally you're sort of focusing on that task at hand. So it's quite nice. You're kind of ignoring things that have gone on in the past and things maybe you're worrying about in the future. And it just sort of cleared your head. And rock climbing is also fantastic for that. When you're hanging off by your fingertips, a few hundred feet off the ground, it
Yeah,
focuses the mind, shall we say? And it's also very good training. It's good for the physical health as well as the mental health.
absolutely. Fit.
But yeah, and obviously flying. I've got a little Super Cub, which I got a share of, and I love punting around in that little one. It's proper old school L18C, ex Belgian Air Force. It's got no electrics. It's got no flaps. It's just got a 100 horsepower engine, which you just hand swing the prop and jump in and off you go. I just love it. It's brilliant. Absolutely lovely little machine.
Certainly keeping busy, Matt. That's for sure.
Yeah, I
Favorite
did like
aircraft
to.
you've flown?
Pilatus Porter, without a doubt. That's I don't even need to think about that one. Yeah, it's just the best plane ever. If I ever won the Euro Millions or whatever, I'd definitely have one of those as a little run around, just for a laugh. I'd love to take one on an air show, on the air show scene, because I
Cool.
don't think people can quite appreciate just how maneuverable and just what that aircraft can do. Its ability to do this, what they call a beta descent, where you basically pull the prop straight back onto beta pitch, where you've got the airflow straight onto the prop, and it just acts like an air brake, so you can just nose it straight down, like
Oh, wow.
completely nose down.
Really?
Yeah, it's
Wow.
just phenomenal. It's most aircraft, if you do that, you go through VNE pretty quickly, but the Porter can just generate so much drag off its own prop that yeah, it's a bit of a party trick for that plane.
One you would like to fly either past or present?
Ooh, I'd love to fly a Mustang. Um, That would be very cool. I was lucky enough to have a go in a Spitfire, kind of again when I had more money than sense, when I was working out in Asia, and the time to kind of do it. And the Spitfire's lovely. I do like the Spitfire, but I really do have a hankering for a Mustang. I think that would just be something about that plane. It's got the right engine, and just yeah, it looks like a cool bit of kit.
So to wrap up, yeah, can we find you online? Do you have Twitter or X now, Instagram, anything like that? Our viewers can follow you
Yeah,
on.
I've got all of those ones. So you can find me at Indo Pilot, INDO Pilot, just all one word. And yeah, I'm on all of those things. So yeah, just do a little search, you'll find me.
Awesome stuff. Everything will be linked in the description for you guys. But Matt, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to hear a bit about your story.
Ah, you're actually welcome. Thanks so much for having me.